Well, hello everybody. I don't know who everybody is. I don't know if anybody is on, but that's a good way to start. Hello, I'm Nan Simonsen, and I am the author of Aging Powerfully. And traditionally, every Thursday morning at 10 on my Power Agers Facebook Live presentation, I present a subject. And we're doing it today because I'm heading off for the National Health Association conference in Cleveland tomorrow morning, and so I won't be here for Thursday's Facebook Live. Therefore, we're doing it today, and I hope that you have a chance to take a look at my book, to take a look at my website, nansimonsen.com, and to see my YouTube channel, just Nan Simonsen, YouTube Nan Simonsen, to see what I am up to. Bottom line, I am a whole food, plant-based cooking instructor, lifestyle medicine, and health and lifestyle coach. I work with lifestyle medicine in Riverside, California. Ooh, I've got to do something with my hair. It's just all funky. Um, with Dr. Dysinger, who's a founder of the College of Lifestyle Medicine. And during my cooking videos, I talk about health and wellness and the reason we use certain foods to benefit our health and give us a chance to live long and healthy, not just long. Some people say, well, I don't know if I want to eat that well. I may live longer, but I don't know if it'll be worth it. It's worth it. I just turned 70 a few months ago, and feel better than I ever have with almost 3 years of whole food, plant-based nutrition under my belt, and never felt better. And that's coming off of all kinds of problems that were coming up. So today, I wanted to talk about body over brain. A lot of us know that what we think, what we feel, and what we carry with us in terms of stress affects our body. Yes, it does. But a lot of people don't realize that we can control our mind with our body. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to recommend to you some further study, and that study would be with Dr. Andrew Huberman. He is a neuroscientist. He's not a physician, a PhD doctor, and he is a neuroscientist with his own lab, the Huberman Lab at Stanford University. He's a professor as well as a researcher, and his focus is on the eyes and on breath and on body functions that affect the mind. And he is brilliant. He's just brilliant and easy to listen to. You can find him on Instagram, you can find him on Facebook, and he posts constantly. He's in his 40s, and he posts constantly because he might be 50 now. I don't know. Because he feels a responsibility to get this information out to people, that we can control so much more than we think we can if we know some, I'll call it hacks, but more than that, it's just knowledge about how our brain and body, I'll call it coexist. And actually, I have a mission. My mission is to spread the word that what we see around us in American society, and that is illness that begins earlier and earlier in our generations, kids with type 2 diabetes, 20 and 30-year-olds who are on statins or diabetic, or dealing with clogged arteries at 30 and 40. And it's the food, it's the lifestyle. And my book talks about the options that we have, 10 points of 10 modalities, lifestyle modalities that we can incorporate that can give us longevity, health and longevity for decades. At 70, you might think, oh, well, she's ready to throw in the towel. She's an old lady. Well, yeah, statistically and numerically, I'm an old lady, but I intend to keep going for 10, 20, 30 years. And with that in mind, that gives me an entire lifetime if you think about it. Well, my message is adopting these modalities can help you do the same thing. You may be 30 and want to ignore me even talking about aging, but eventually those numbers become your numbers. And the better we've taken care of ourselves early on, the better we're able to take anything on as we get older. So let's go ahead and talk about Dr. Huberman, because I pay a lot of attention to him. I've listened to a lot of his podcasts, and that's where this information is coming from. It's a compilation of his thoughts, and he's the expert, I'm not. As a matter of fact, my book is very much like that. I digested the information of many, many, many experts in terms of longevity and wellness and best human nutrition and the blue zones. I think a lot of you are familiar with that. And put them all down in terms of recommendations and science-based changes that we can make, recommendations on science-based, from science-based information, changes that we can make that can totally turn around our health. So that, for example, at 70, I'm on no medications other than a thyroid medicine, and that's because when my thyroid problems were diagnosed 20 years ago, nobody looked for a cause. They could have, should have, but they didn't. And then when all kinds of other things went wrong, blood pressure went up, pre-diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, hurt everywhere. And they wanted to just give pills, kind of like with the thyroid medicine. And I said, no, I'm going to find a way to get past this. I changed my diet, changed my lifestyle, and now there's no other medications. I should have been on all kinds of things had I listened to them, the them being conventional medical wisdom. So, as opposed to lifestyle medicine and what Hippocrates believed, which was the body wants to heal itself if given half a chance. So, let's talk about the body-brain relationship, and let's introduce a concept I want you to think about. I think these are more military terms, but I want to introduce 3 bodily states of being. And I'm going to bring this up later as I go through my explanation of ways that we can affect what we think and how we feel using our body. There are 3 states of bodily reality, and these are not even concrete. We can be back on our heels, we can be flat-footed, or we can be forward center of mass. If you've been in the military, you probably know what this means. If you know anything about sports and boxing, you probably know what this means. It just came across my radar because I heard a couple of guys in the sports world talking about these terms, or with these terms, as it relates to where we are in our life and where we are in our ability to make things happen, good things in our life. So, back on our heels, what does that mean? That means as if we had been punched. Whoa, we've been taken aback. We are not where we want to go. Flat-footed, what does that mean? Well, we've got ourselves nailed. We don't know that we're getting anywhere with it, but we're at least in an equilibrium. And then forward center of mass. That's like the boxer who is ready to take one foot forward and swing and take things into his own hands. That means that's where we're in a position, a situation where we are ready to make something happen. And so those terms are really great visuals for our conversation about how we can control our mind and mental functions with our body. So let's look at the reality of it, and I'm going to be quoting him a lot, As Dr. Huberman says, the body has a profound influence on our mind. As a matter of fact, did you know that a good part, not a good part of the body, but the entire central nervous system is all part of the mind, which really equals brain? Did you know that our eyes are actually part of our brain? They are part of brain matter that is on the outside so that we can get peripheral vision, so that we can be connected to the outside world without that hard shell of a skull in the way. But those perceptors are all part of the brain. That's one of the reasons that Dr. Huberman is so fascinated by the eyes and the way even our eyes in other conversations I've heard him in, he has talked about ways to modulate brain states simply by the movement of our eyes, but that's for another conversation. But you'll find him on YouTube and on Instagram, and you can come up with, you can find on your own a lot of really brilliant hacks that we can use to affect our states of mind. Okay, states of mind, as our state of mind, for example, thoughts, feelings, emotions, perception, can actually be affected in a very simple way by something that we do, and that is our sleep, especially deep sleep. When we sleep, and you'll hear a little later about sleep and neuroplasticity and what that means, but when we sleep, we put, especially in the deep sleep, that's even before REM sleep, when we are in deep sleep, our mind, our brain actually, starts getting rid of junk and strengthening the connections with new information. I guess you can have your sound off and still get your ringtone. I don't know if my sound was off. What was I saying? All right. When you're in deep sleep, that is when our brain is not only doing a deep clean, but also wiring connections together. You could have been studying Spanish and you couldn't remember the words and you couldn't get the sentences and the context, and yet somehow the next day, the same material seems easy to you. You hadn't done any more study. That's because of the connections your brain makes, but you've got to have the sleep in order to get that, put our brain in that kind of a state so that it can do that kind of work. When people think it's not that important to get sleep, that, well, it makes me feel a little tired, that's all. That's absolutely wrong. You're actually cheating yourself out of the power of the brain. Circadian rhythm is another thing that we need to be aware of, and I've done a Facebook Live on circadian rhythm and sleep and the body's clock, so I'm not going to go into all of that, but in a nutshell, our circadian rhythm is our body's internal clock, and every living organism has a body clock that, in the case of humans and most, I think all mammals, is let's say set off by or geared to recognize light. That's the value of the eyes. When we get out first thing in the morning and we take in natural light, we have set our body clock, because there's something called a pineal gland, and when we are exposed to natural light, the earlier the better, because our circadian rhythm really follows the light of day. When we get out and get that light, the pineal gland sends out a signal that will put us in a sleep state much later in the day by building up melatonin and releasing it 12 to 13 hours after our initial exposure to the light. That's just part of our body clock. So it's important to understand that the circadian rhythm, whether you understand it or not, is a very important part of of our ability to even think well and think straight, because it controls hormones, it controls alertness, it controls muscle strength, it controls our ability then again to rest and sleep. So one of the ways that our body, when we honor its time clock, can serve us well is if we get into routines. If we're doing things on a regular basis, our hormonal system, which is again affected by the diurnal clock, that daylight and evening clock, the circadian rhythm, is very sensitive to and very actually desirous of routines that are predictable, because hormones will then be secreted on a regular basis based on that predictable movement. And what does that have to do with us? That means that we can create tools to actually strengthen our ability to sort of modulate highs and lows during our day. A way to, I suppose, understand highs and lows, if you've ever drunk coffee or any caffeine drink, you have too much, you're sky high. When the body has adjusted for that, or it wears off, you go straight down and you have a low, you have a valley. Well, that's the way our hormones are when we've adjusted them to a certain routine and start breaking that routine. We will have the highs and lows that can make things really difficult to maneuver. And so for that reason, it's a really good tool in our tool belt to have routines. And that again is the body controlling the mind, our ability to make decisions, to do things on a regular basis, get up, get the light. Another great way to introduce the day is to start movement first thing in the day. A lot of people, myself included, exercise first thing in the morning. Wake up at a little around 6 o'clock. By 6:15, up and dressed. By 6:30, out the door for an hour of either biking or hiking, one of the two. And so bringing in our behaviors, the things that we schedule for ourselves in a physical sense, can make a big difference in the way we get through our day as far as moods and alertness and receptivity to new information. When the mind is, I'm quoting here, in other words, when the mind isn't where we want to be, we need to use the body to intervene, and intervene in some ways that maybe we hadn't thought of, such as breathing, our breath work. Breathing uses the diaphragm, which has striated muscle like our like our muscles, as opposed to a lot of other bodily functions that we can't control in any way. We can control our diaphragm. It's under voluntary control. And our levels of alertness can be affected by the way we breathe. There's something called Wim Hof breath, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. Wim Hof is a fellow who is known for putting himself in extremes, like extreme cold, not extreme heat, but extreme cold, to affect his body's, I'm going to say, strength, immunity, ability to take difficulty, and that has affected his mind, and he's become rather famous for his, I'll call it, resilience. And fast breathing, we'll talk about that just a little bit later, and slow breathing, physiological sighs, I've spoken of before, but I'm going to review that because the Wim Hof breathing, the quick inhales, exhales, can actually energize us. The slow, steady breathing can calm us down, and I'll talk about why and what that has and why it actually affects us. But physiologically, before I even talk about the breath, Why would breath work have anything to do with our, I'll say, state of mind? Well, for one thing, carbon dioxide, as it builds up in our body, causes us um, anxiety. In other words, if you hold your breath too long, you actually at a point will basically be forced to release that and take a deep breath. Well, there's something in the lungs called um, uh, al, al, alveoli, which are the little sacs of the lungs. You've got your lungs, you've got little teeny sacs all over. When we're taking casual breaths, when we're sometimes under exertion, for example, if someone's coughing or someone's crying, or in the middle of the night when we're doing very shallow breathing, those alveoli can sort of collapse and carbon dioxide builds up in our lungs. We will involuntarily take a deep breath, and even crying, you can hear kids do this. That is part of our bodies, what they call the physiological sigh. And what that does for you is it calms you down, but it also balances the carbon dioxide and the oxygen in your blood. And the physiological sighs are one very important way that we can calm ourselves. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that, but you'll understand then what it's actually doing when we talk about it and how that can be. We have something called an autonomic nervous system, and that is our not almost involuntary, mainly involuntary nervous system response that affects us physically. And so that would be mind down to body, but that we can also by certain activity, sort of send that right back up to the mind in terms of affecting certain states. For example, the vagus nerve, and a lot of us have heard about the vagus nerve, runs from the spinal column and affects the digestion primarily. And so the vagus nerve goes all the way through us, and it affects the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic sides of our nervous system. The sympathetic, which sounds like it's a good thing, is not. The sympathetic nervous system is the one that sets you into motion, gets the adrenaline going, shoots out the cortisol, and puts you into fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system is the one that helps you rest and digest. If you are in fight or flight, you're not going to digest well. You're not going to be able to sleep well. All of those things are going to affect you, but we can control them. The phrenic nerve, which is also an important system that we can affect, is the one that runs from the, I call it spinal column, but it's more specific in the nervous system, and that goes down to the diaphragm. That one is quicker than the vagus nerve, in that the vagus nerve takes a while to actually show any changes, and not a long time, but it takes a while, whereas the phrenic nerve acts almost instantly, and again is the connection between the body and the neurons that affect breathing. So it's the phrenic nerve that is affected when we're doing our parasympathetic, or sorry, our the physiological sighs or the really quick rapid breath. If we want to affect our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system so that we can get ourselves out of fight or flight, be able to rest and digest, things that we can do are, for example, singing or chanting, meditation or massage, deep and slow breathing. Anyone that's ever done yoga knows that that part of what yoga is best for, besides toning and besides muscle control, is breath control. Paying attention to your breath, steady in and out, breathing in certain rhythms, rhythms that actually affect our body. And again, when we affect our body, as we've just heard with the breath, we're affecting now we know, the vagus nerve. And when we affect our breath as it relates to the diaphragm, which is more physiological side than what I've just talked about, then it affects the phrenic nerve. And we'll again talk just a little bit more about that. All right. What comes into play with all of this? Our adrenals, our cortisol, our adrenaline, our epinephrine, which affects the brain. That is more the the um, the neurotransmitter that affects the brain, but it's the same as adrenaline, which affects the body. And one of the things that affect cortisol that can blunt the cortisol response is carbohydrates. You know, it's really interesting because if you've either read my book or listened to podcasts where I just happen to say this, or even my YouTube cooking classes, sometimes I'll bring the reality of this up. For 55 years, I had an eating disorder, and I couldn't break it, even with a lot of different modalities of therapy. And what ended up helping was a book called Brain Over Binge, something that really just dealt with the urges and how to overcome them and why they were there. But also because so many therapists believed that the urges would only stop when we fixed all of the things that were related to past traumas and life issues. And it turned out none of that was true in my case anyway. Just had to learn how to deal with the urges. But the second part of it was to find a way of eating that balanced my system. And the only way I found to do that was with a whole food plant-based diet, because whole food plant-based means not processed foods, not sugary snacks, not high refined carb crackers and chips and cookies and muffins and all these things that really are everywhere in our society as it relates to foods that we eat. Highly refined bread bread, I'll call them substitutes. I say this all the time. The McDonald's and most of the fast food restaurant buns have 25 to 35 ingredients in them. That's highly refined when bread is nothing but water, yeast, and salt and flour. Anyway, so carbs actually help uh, blunt the cortisol response. Well, why would I have even brought that up? Because that's something that with whole food, plant-based, I personally I probably eat 75 to 80% of my calories from carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates. That's beans, grains, legumes, lots of fruit, sweet potatoes, white potatoes by the bushelful. And I've never felt so balanced, and I've never felt so well. And when I read that, I thought, I'll be darned. I wonder if these things that I couldn't even explain after 55 years being able to stop in 3 months had something to do with, first of all, knowing I didn't have to follow the urges, but second, not feeling that tension, that anxiety over what was at one time blatantly controlling me as I tried to control my diet by really what most of us was doing, and that was staying away from carbohydrates. Carbs are bad. Boy, was that wrong. They just had to be a certain kind, and that is the unrefined kind. So I bring that up because that's one thing that we can do to lower stress levels. You just eat a good meal, and that meal would be preferably with lots of fiber and a whole food carbohydrate like a potato, like a big bowl of whole grain, I'll say even pasta, preferably beans or grains. Okay, movement. Movement also reduces cortisol and the adrenaline that courses through us when we get anxious about something. And a lot of our anxiety comes from what we're thinking. It comes from our perception of what's going on. That's why we have so much control in that way. And I talk about this in my book a lot, and I do this a lot in my own life, have to reevaluate whatever is going on in the mind with a new story. We can't necessarily, as and Dr. Huberman says, we can't control the mind with the mind. I can't just change my mind about what I'm thinking about something, but I can introduce new thoughts. I can't just erase what I'm thinking or feeling, but I can introduce a new way of thinking about it. And so to turn something that can make us anxious and mad and crazy and worried to something that makes us settled and calm and philosophical and accepting can change our cortisol and adrenal levels. But until we do that, or when we're not doing that, or even when we are, another tool is to use our body to do it. And movement is one, what we're eating is another, and then how we're breathing is another. Okay, so let's talk about that turbo, or what they call tumo breathing, which a lot of people are just calling Wim Hof now. He teaches people, and I don't do it, and it's not that I don't want to, but I haven't. And the Wim Hof breathing is, it's a systematic way of doing it, but bottom line, it's short, fast inhales and exhales. If you do that, you will find that your energy level goes up. If you're not doing it well, your anxiety level will go up as well. But a lot of athletes will do that. They will pump themselves up with breath and then hold it and then release it and then pump themselves up again and hold it and release it. I don't like that feeling, and I don't need to get hyped up, even though I do this when I'm riding my bike and I'm going uphill. So I say I don't do it, and yet I do, but not in this formalized manner. When I'm going up a hill and I'm determined not to stop mid-hill because it's hard, I do the deep breathe, or that kind of breathing. It's actually shallow, fast, and I keep pumping like crazy, and it gets me up hills. So maybe I do that, but I don't think of it in that way. But what they have found is that people that do this kind of breathing actually have better immune response, because it mimics a stress response, and in response to stress, our body activates our immune system. That's also a reason that we can't live in a stressful state, because if your immune system is regularly activated, it will overwhelm you in terms of your adrenal glands to be able to continue to release cortisone, epinephrine, or adrenaline. We can't keep doing that. It wears us out. The system can't keep shooting out those hormones that are meant to be just quick releases, quick flashes to get us through danger. But something like that shows that we can, by using our breath, energize ourselves when we need to, and increase our alertness before a test, before something that we're determined to shine on. We can do some of the quick breaths, but if I were going to be doing this on a regular basis in a methodical way, I would look up Tumo breathing, or I would look up Wim Hof breathing and work with it that way. But to calm your mind and to calm yourself anytime, physiological sigh, or physiologic sigh is something that you can also look up. And it is our breathing in twice fast and then letting it out slowly. It looks like this. You can do it once, you can do it twice. I've been talking about this for a long time with the patients that I work with. When I do group sessions every week, I do group sessions with the clinic, and I work with patients individually as well, and I work with individual clients. And I've heard from almost all of them, and I feel the same way. And if I can't sleep at night, or the minute I lay down and I'm just buzzing because I was working on something and I felt rushed, and now I go to bed and I've got to get some of that energy out of me, I'll do probably twice in a row the physiologic sigh. Because remember what I said, when you breathe in and then you do it again, you've got those alveoli, that you're, those little sacs that you're puffing up again, that you're filling with oxygen. We're displacing carbon dioxide. Let it out, and you're rebalancing that carbon dioxide and oxygen mix. And it's a very good way to calm yourself down. Okay, cold shower, ice baths. A lot of people talk about purposely introducing something that causes stress that will then strengthen our body with and our immune system, because again, stress will build the immune system, but we're doing it on purpose. We're not doing it long term, we're doing it short term. I've gotten in the habit now of doing something that I actually love, and that is finishing my showers with cold water. Or if I take a bath and I'm really hot, probably not, I haven't done this second thing before I go to bed, because I want to be warm and then go to bed. But finishing my morning showers, especially with cold water, and it's really bracing. You know, flip the water all the way to cold, and as I'm waiting for it, I actually say out loud, I just said this on another video, I say out loud, "Here it comes, gird your loins," and the water, and it's cold, and you get goosebumps, and you get it all over you. And actually, you can get real excited and happy about it. Today, I was so happy about it, and I said, "Oh, this feels great," because it's tingly and it's wonderful. Well, there's something called heat shock proteins that are activated when we even get 2 minutes of cold, and you get the goosebumps. And it actually does help increase your immunity, because it does create stress. And some people will do it for long periods of time. I'm not talking about that because I don't have the experience with that, but that's my own little way. Okay, and then what plays into all of this are neurotransmitters. We are physically using our body to affect the neurotransmitters in our brain. Our gut, first of all, our microbiome is where 70% of our neurotransmitters are produced. That's one of the reasons that a whole food, plant-based diet can serve you so well. That's why so many athletes are going to it, because not only does it help them with not only digestion, but perfect and excellent nutrition that can get them through some really hard workouts, but they love the recovery, because the recovery, when you're so nutritionally cared for with all of the antioxidants and the phytochemicals and phytonutrients, really pays off. But the other thing that is so important to know about plant-based eating, whether or not you choose to go completely plant-based, but the more plants you eat, the more fiber you're getting. The more fiber you get, the better your microbiome is cared for, because the only thing those microbes eat is starch, resistant starch, starch in anything that is plant-based. The only thing that does not have any fiber and any starch would be your animal products. And so that's why I'm perfectly happy not to have any of those at all. And it's, again, served me really well. But 70% of your neurotransmitters are formed in your gut. So the better your gut, the better your microbiome, the more consistently they're going to serve you. Well, one of the most important neurotransmitters as it relates to our even being willing to take on the tasks that are going to make the difference, and that is good habits with the way we use our body. And I'll just outline that very briefly in just a minute, is dopamine. Dopamine is the reward neurotransmitters. Um, it is released. A lot of people think of dopamine as the thing that is released at the end of a task when you've completed it. And actually, that's not so. Dr. Huberman said that dopamine, and the most important release of dopamine, is in the process. But we have to be thinking about the process being the reward. So, in other words, if all we focus on is the end result, and I think we've all been there, we put all of our heart and soul and our mind into the end result. I'm going to run the marathon, but it's going to take me 10 months to learn how to do it. If we think of nothing but that marathon as the reward, as opposed to the strengthening, the pride, the conditioning, the wins along the way, we miss out on all the dopamine throughout that process. That's the most important dopamine, because that sets up a reward circuit that allows us to even more easily tap into that dopamine. So what we want to realize then is that we want to attach a sense of reward to our effort process. And a lot of us have found that when we make that end goal, and all we thought about was the end goal, you get the dopamine, but that's it. In other words, all that time that we could have been feeling a sense of accomplishment is moot if we put all of the eggs in that one basket of gaining that reward. It's over, and then we feel not defeated, but we feel a loss, an emptiness. We feel sometimes down. There's a song about that. Is this all there is? Is this all there is? If that's all there is, my friend, I'll keep dancing and break out the booze and have a ball. See, I've gotten carried away with that one, but yeah. So, all right, I'll tie all this together in a minute because we're almost done. All right, so and I'm quoting from Dr. Huberman. Dopamine is subjectively controlled. We can attach meaning based on our interpretation, and that's what I was just talking about. In other words, if we're back on our heels, we put in effort to gain some equilibrium, we get dopamine. If we are flat-footed, in other words, we're on our way, we take pride in being equal and in that equilibrium, we get our dopamine. Forward center of mass, when we're moving toward it, we even get bigger hits of dopamine. And then when we make the goal, of course, we're proud, but a lot of people will already have another goal set before they make the first one, knowing that the biggest hit was along the way. It was the journey. It wasn't just the destination. Dopamine has the ability to buffer adrenaline levels. And what he means by that is that people, as adrenaline builds, the adrenaline is a stress hormone. As we're moving toward a goal and we're getting tired and we're getting spent and our mind is interfering and telling us this is too hard, maybe we shouldn't try. And this is physical feats I'm talking about. Sometimes it's a challenge like learning Spanish. Sometimes it's a physical movement of the body. Sometimes it's getting anything done that needs to be done, but that we start questioning our ability to follow through on. When we tell ourselves a story that what we're doing is exactly right and dopamine kicks in, it can actually squelch down the adrenaline, giving us a second wind. You hear about the second wind, and keep us going. And we have to trust that, but more importantly, the more we do it, even on little tiny, small wins, the more our body is used to that pathway, and the more often that'll happen. It's one of the strongest triggers for neuroplasticity. Dopamine, let me get this right. Neuroplasticity is our brain's ability to learn something, to adapt to new things. I had to adapt to flavors I wasn't used to when I went whole food plant-based. I had to adapt to cutting way, way back on sugar, oil, and salt because everything processed will win us over and make us want more, and food from fast food restaurants, and actually most food made in restaurants, and maybe the way we get used to cooking, loaded with sugar, oil, and fat. We think that's a treat. Unfortunately, it's something that sends out so much dopamine into our system that nothing else satisfies, and so it becomes this loop. And one of the reasons that we're getting larger and larger in terms of BMI as a society, because we are so used to these foods that are way too rich for our systems, that keep us wanting more than we should eat. So for that reason, we can modulate that, but we have to neuroadapt. And neuroplasticity is part of that, and that is our ability to go through a change and be able to stay with that long enough to be able to adapt. But dopamine is a strong trigger in that. And so when we're trying to neuroadapt to something and we use even physical cues to get us out of a, let's say, I'll call it an urge state. For example, when somebody who is trying to, well, like me, when I was trying to stop my binge eating and an urge would come up, I would do something else. I would do something else that ultimately got me a dopamine hit. I'd walk around the block. I'd smell the roses. I'd go out and garden. I'd do something that made me feel good, that raised the dopamine, pet the cat. Anything other than give in to something that required a really strong hit. I would be happy with smaller hits, and ultimately they became the norm because of neuroplasticity, and they became a reward that was great enough that I didn't have to go back to these really strong hits of, well, what a binge will give you. People can use that in smoking, they can use that in drinking, they can use that in shopping, in anything they do too much of. Okay. Serotonin, you may think, yes, but I thought that serotonin was the thing I was aiming for. Well, the problem with serotonin is that it's a gratitude and a calm and a reward, not so much reward, but satisfied and safe neurotransmitter. In other words, it kind of calms us down, makes us hunker in, not looking for a getting out of our comfort zone. He joked that that's maybe why people who smoke marijuana sometimes are just real chill and laid back, because marijuana stimulates serotonin, and you're just gonna, be in a placid place and be perfectly happy to stay there. There's a man named Admiral McCraven who in 2014 addressed the graduating class in a commencement ceremony at the University of Texas in Austin. And his 19-minute speech has been viewed, I don't know how many millions of times, because it really, even though he is a Naval SEAL, he's a high-ranking admiral, he was known in the military, nobody knew him otherwise, everybody knows, well, relatively speaking, Admiral McCraven, and he's written a book that followed one of his dictates in his talk. He spoke to these students about not settling, not taking the easy route, but doing the things that set up, it's what I'm talking about today, the physical stuff, doing the things that set us up for a repeat of success that sets our neurotransmitters, body first, in other words, body, movement trumping motivation. Don't tell me I've got to get motivated before I take the action. Or if you told me that, I'd say, well, I've tried that, that doesn't work. And that's why people can feel motivated to do things forever and never get anything done. Action trumps motivation. And so he gave them, I believe it was 9 things that they should never ever do. And one of them was get out of bed and don't make your bed. In other words, or maybe he said it in the other way, 9 things they should do. But one of them was always, always make your bed. What was the point of that? Who cares? Why in the military did they flip a coin on a made bed, and if it didn't bounce, the guy makes it again? Who cares? The point was that when you have habits and you do these habits that make sense, and one of the ways they make sense is if you make the bed, you're not going to get back in it. Another one, when you get home, you're going to take pride that the bed is made and it looks good. The other thing is, once you've done that, you're probably going to move more into your daily routine. And so now you're on your way. And it goes on and on and on. That very simple act. He wrote a book called Make Your Bed. That's very, very popular as well. So again, that's center of mass forward. That is putting yourself in a position to just keep rolling forward and success with it. All right. Another quote of his, and then I'm going to wrap things up. The key is to reward yourself when you're doing the hard work, when adrenaline is wearing you out, but you don't quit. This teaches your neural pathways to keep going and releases dopamine to celebrate the effort. It buffers stress. It will put you in your center of mass forward state. Love that. Be deliberate. Push away the things that make you reflexive. And he talked about that. Reflexive meaning that I'm going to go through my day and whatever happens to catch my attention is what I'm going to do, as opposed to being deliberate. And that is going into each day with a body of, I'll call it a body of intention, that instead of hither and yon, picking up whatever happens to come into sight, going in with things lined up. He was asked in this interview what he does that put him in a state where every day he's feeling like he is making good connections and keeping the dopamine pathways and the neuroplasticity viable. And he says he starts every day with Yoga Nidra. I did that this morning. You can find apps on Yoga Nidra. You can simply go to YouTube and Google Yoga Nidra. So what I did is I Googled Yoga Nidra Dr. Huberman. And he actually there were videos of him talking about it, but then there was also videos that came up that he had recommended. There's 10-minute one, there's 20-minute. He does 20 minutes, and he does them once or twice a day. And Yoga Nidra is a way to basically wash your brain. It keeps us from ruminating and thoughts controlling us instead of us controlling thoughts. And the more you do meditation or Yoga Nidra, the more you're in a position to basically be controlling what is going through your mind and stay on pace for whatever your goals are. And this guy gets a lot done in a day. Gratitude. This was interesting. Number 2, gratitude. He says, I write down morning and night the things I'm grateful for. And the way he said this is, it's scientifically proven that gratitude brings happiness. It raises serotonin, and it resets, it raises serotonin, and serotonin resets dopamine. Loved that. Gratitude is scientifically proven to bring us happiness. And he said, because he studies in his lab, he studies people who put out supreme efforts and get rewards, like the military forces that are like Naval SEALs, the really difficult things that a lot of people who try never are able to accomplish. And he said that they do the same thing with gratitude in these special force communities. That's interesting. Number 3, he says he wakes up every morning and gets in the sun. He gets into natural light because it keeps his circadian rhythm going. And number 4, he moves. And he says, and then the rest of the day just takes care of itself. But I put myself right away into a position of neuroplasticity, my neurotransmitters where I want them to be, but also in setting my day up, he says, so that I know by the end I'll be proud of the result. Something worth doing. All right, everyone. I will let this go now. I hope you've learned something. I hope it was worthwhile. And I will be back next Thursday at 10 o'clock rather than 1:30 on a Wednesday. And be well. Consider helping me with my mission in Aging Powerfully. I talk about a mission in the back of the book, well, actually, the back here, about spreading the word that making decisions every day to do certain things that strengthen us in any way we can, and following some basic pillars of health, including, well, what we eat, and as close as we can to as many plants as we can possibly get in us, to the degree that maybe even someday we're whole food, plant-based, will give you all the strength you need and keep us going for decades. So take care. Have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Bye-bye.